The advertisement had promised a rancher in New Mexico territory seeking a wife, but nothing in those carefully worded lines had mentioned that Quinton Keller expected someone who could actually read them. Willa Owens stood on the dusty platform of the Tucumcari train station in the summer of 1887, her single worn carpetbag clutched in both hands, watching a tall man with sun-darkened skin and intense brown eyes approach her with measured steps that spoke of both confidence and caution. "Miss Owens." His voice was deeper than she had imagined during the long journey from Missouri, carrying the weight of the high desert and endless sky. "Yes." She smoothed her traveling dress, trying to calm the trembling in her fingers. "Mr. Keller." He nodded once, reaching for her bag with an easy courtesy that made her heart skip. "Welcome to Tucumcari. I hope the journey wasn't too difficult." "It was fine." The lie came easily, practiced over years of hiding the truth that made her different, marked her as lesser in the eyes of people who measured worth by education. She had survived 22 years without letters making sense to her eyes, and she would survive this too. Quinton loaded her bag into a sturdy wagon hitched to two horses that looked well cared for despite the dust coating their legs. The town spread behind them, a collection of adobe buildings and wooden storefronts baking under the relentless August sun. Mountains rose in the distance, purple and mysterious against the cloudless sky. "The ranch is about an hour's ride," he said, helping her onto the wagon seat with a gentleness that surprised her. His hands were calloused and strong but careful. "I should tell you that it's not much. Just me and about 200 head of cattle, some horses. My house is small but sturdy. I'm not afraid of small." Willa settled her skirts around her, acutely aware of how close he sat when he climbed up beside her. "I grew up in a one-room cabin with 6 siblings. The advertisement mentioned you were recently orphaned. Cholera took my parents last winter. My brothers and sisters went to relatives, but I was old enough to make my own way." She did not mention that those relatives had made it clear there was no room for a grown woman who could barely sign her own name, whose inability to read had always been a source of family shame. Quinton clicked his tongue at the horses and they started forward, wagon wheels crunching over the hard-packed dirt road leading out of town. "I'm sorry for your loss. My own parents died 5 years back within months of each other. It's a lonely thing." They rode in silence for a while, the vast emptiness of New Mexico territory spreading around them in shades of gold and brown and green, where scrub brush clung to life. The heat pressed down like a physical weight, but there was something clean about it, honest in a way that the humid Missouri summers had never been. "Can I ask why you chose to answer my advertisement?" Quinton's question came carefully, as though he expected her to bolt like a startled deer. Willa considered her answer, weighing honesty against self-preservation. "I wanted a fresh start somewhere nobody knew me, and I wanted a home of my own. Those seem like good reasons." He was quiet another moment before adding, "I should be honest with you too. I'm not much for fancy words or courtship. I'm 30 years old and I've spent most of my life working cattle. I can promise you a roof, food, safety, and respect. I hope that in time we might find something more, but I won't rush you." The knot in Willa's stomach loosened slightly. "That's more than fair." The ranch appeared as they crested a low rise, a small adobe house with a covered porch, a barn that had seen better days, and several corrals where horses lifted their heads to watch the approaching wagon. A windmill turned lazily in the breeze, its metal blades catching the sunlight. Beyond the immediate buildings, cattle dotted the landscape, grazing on whatever sparse vegetation they could find. "Home," Quinton said simply, and something in his voice told her he had built this all himself, piece by piece, year by year. He helped her down from the wagon, and Willa noticed that he let go of her hand immediately, not presuming anything despite the fact that she had traveled halfway across the country specifically to marry him. The house's interior was dim and blessedly cool, thick adobe walls keeping out the worst of the heat. It consisted of 3 rooms, a main living area with a stone fireplace and a small kitchen, a bedroom, and what looked like a storage room. "I'll sleep in the storage room until we're properly married," Quinton said, reading her thoughts. "The circuit preacher comes through about once a month. He was just here 2 weeks back, so it'll be another couple of weeks before he returns." "I appreciate that." Willa set her bag down, looking around at the simple but well-maintained space. Everything was clean, orderly, clearly the home of a man who took care of what was his. "I need to tend to the animals before dark," he said. "Make yourself at home. There's a pantry there with food, and the water pump is just outside the back door. I'll be back in an hour or so." After he left, Willa explored her new home with careful attention. The pantry held basics: flour, cornmeal, beans, salt pork, coffee, sugar. The dishes were mismatched but clean. In the bedroom, a large bed dominated the space, covered with a simple quilt that had seen many washings. A dresser stood against one wall and a chair sat near the window. She was unpacking her few belongings when something on the dresser caught her eye: a leather-bound book. Her stomach dropped. She picked it up, opening it to pages filled with those mysterious symbols that everyone else seemed to decipher so easily. She stared at them, trying once again to make sense of what she saw, but the letters danced and switched and refused to form any meaning. Willa quickly set the book down and finished her unpacking, a familiar sense of dread settling over her. How long before Quinton discovered her secret? How long before he looked at her with the same disappointment and pity she had seen in so many eyes? That evening, Quinton returned dusty and tired but immediately washed up and helped her prepare a simple supper of beans and cornbread. They ate at a small table, the silence comfortable rather than awkward. "Tomorrow I'll show you around properly," he said. "The chickens need feeding morning and evening, and I'd appreciate help with the garden if you're willing. It's struggling in this heat, but we might save some of it." "I'm a good gardener," Willa said, relieved to find something she could actually contribute. "My mother always said I had a gift for making things grow." "That's a valuable talent out here," he smiled, and it transformed his serious face into something warmer. "Most things seem determined to die in this territory." After supper, Quinton lit a lamp and settled into a worn chair near the fireplace, even though no fire burned in the summer heat. He reached for the book from the bedroom, and Willa's heart began to race. "I hope you don't think it's strange," he said, opening the pages. "But I like to read for a bit before bed. It's a habit my mother taught me. This is actually her Bible, one of the few things I kept of hers." Willa busied herself with washing the dishes, her back to him, panic rising in her throat. "That's not strange at all. Do you read much?" The question was casual, innocent, her hands stilled in the wash water. This was the moment. She could continue lying, could pretend and deflect and hide as she had done her whole life. But something about Quinton's honest brown eyes and straightforward manner made her want to try something different. "No." Her voice came out barely above a whisper. "I cannot read at all." The silence behind her stretched so long that she finally had to turn around, needing to see his reaction, bracing herself for disappointment or mockery. But Quinton's expression showed only surprise. "You cannot read at all?" "No." She forced herself to meet his gaze. "The letters never made sense to me, no matter how hard I tried. My teachers thought I was stupid or stubborn. My family was ashamed. I know I should have told you before I came all this way, and I'll understand if you want to send me back." Quinton set the Bible down carefully. "Can you write your name? I learned to copy the shapes of it, but I don't really understand what I'm writing." He was quiet for a long moment, and Willa felt her future hanging in the balance. Then he stood and crossed to where she stood by the kitchen basin. "I don't want to send you back, but I wonder if anyone ever really tried to teach you proper, taking the time you needed." "What do you mean?" "My mother was a teacher before she married my father. She used to say that everyone could learn, but some folks needed different methods. Maybe nobody tried the right way with you." Hope flickered in Willa's chest, dangerous and fragile. "You're saying you think I could learn?" "I'm saying I'd be willing to try teaching you if you want to learn." He smiled again. "Can't promise I'll be any good at it, but I've got patience and we've got time." Tears stung her eyes unexpectedly. "Why would you do that?" "Because you're going to be my wife, and because everybody deserves a chance to learn." He said it simply, as though it was the most obvious thing in the world. "We could start tomorrow evening if you'd like, after the day's work is done." Willa nodded, not trusting her voice. She had expected judgment, dismissal, perhaps even cruelty. Instead, she had found unexpected kindness in this quiet rancher who read his mother's Bible by lamplight. The next 2 weeks fell into a rhythm that felt both strange and comfortable. Willa rose before dawn to feed the chickens and start breakfast, while Quinton handled the horses and cattle. They worked side by side in the struggling garden, where she coaxed life from vegetables that seemed determined to wither. She learned which cows were about to calve, and which horses had personalities as distinct as people. She learned that Quinton hummed while he worked, wordless tunes that might have been hymns or might have been songs he made up as he went. And every evening, after supper was cleared and the dishes were washed, they sat together by the fireplace. Even in summer, Quinton built a small fire once the desert temperature dropped, and by its light, he taught her letters. "Start with your name," he said that first night, pulling out a slate and chalk from somewhere. Not copying, but really learning what each letter means and how they make the sounds. He wrote a W in large, clear strokes. "This is W. It makes a W sound. See how it looks. 4 lines going down." Willa stared at the letter, trying to lock its shape into her memory. 4 lines going down. "Right. Now you try." Her first attempt was shaky, the lines uneven, but Quinton did not seem bothered. "Good. Now do it again and again. We want your hand to remember how to make it." They spent that entire evening on just the letter W. By the time Quinton declared them done for the night, Willa's hand ached and her head felt stuffed with cotton, but she could reliably make the shape and remember its sound. "Tomorrow we'll do I," Quinton said. "Nice and simple, just a straight line. Then we'll start putting letters together." "This is going to take forever," Willa said, but without despair. For the first time in her life, learning seemed possible rather than an exercise in humiliation. "Probably. But we've got time." He smiled at her, and she felt something warm unfold in her chest that had nothing to do with the fire. The circuit preacher, a weathered man named Reverend Thompson who looked older than the mountains, arrived on a Wednesday afternoon 3 weeks after Willa's arrival. He performed the brief ceremony on the ranch's porch, with 2 of Quinton's neighboring ranchers standing as witnesses. Willa wore her best dress, which was not saying much, and Quinton had shaved and put on a clean shirt that made him look younger somehow. "Do you, Quinton Andrew Keller, take this woman to be your lawfully wedded wife?" "I do." His voice was steady, his hand warm around hers. "And do you, Willa Owens, take this man to be your lawfully wedded husband?" "I do." She meant it more than she had expected. "Then by the power vested in me, I pronounce you husband and wife." The neighbors congratulated them and shared the simple meal Willa had prepared, then left as the sun began its descent toward the mountains. Reverend Thompson stayed long enough to write out a marriage certificate, which he handed to Quinton with instructions to record it in town. "Can you sign your name, Mrs. Keller?" the Reverend asked kindly. Willa felt Quinton's eyes on her as she carefully copied the shapes he had taught her. Willa. The letters were shaky but recognizable. "Well done," the Reverend said, and she felt a surge of pride that such a small accomplishment could bring. After everyone had gone, Willa found herself suddenly nervous, aware that she was truly married now, that this man was her husband. Quinton seemed to sense her anxiety. "Nothing has to change tonight," he said quietly. "We can take our time with everything." But when bedtime came, he did not retreat to the storage room. Instead, he lay down beside her in the big bed, staying on his side, not touching her. They lay in darkness, listening to the night sounds of the desert, coyotes in the distance, the wind against the walls, the settling of the house. "Are you happy you came here?" Quinton asked softly. Willa considered the question honestly. "Yes." "Are you happy I answered your advertisement?" "Yes." His hand found hers in the darkness, fingers interlacing. "I think we'll do just fine together, Willa Keller." She fell asleep like that, holding her husband's hand, feeling safer than she had in years. Their evening lessons continued, now with an added intimacy that came from sharing a bed and a life. Quinton proved to be a patient teacher, never showing frustration when Willa struggled with letters that looked too similar or sounds that seemed interchangeable. "This one is B," he said one evening about 2 months into her learning. "And this one is D. I know they look almost the same, but see how the B has 2 bumps and the D only has 1. Willa squinted at the slate, trying to make the distinction stick in her mind. "Why did anyone decide to make them so similar? I have no idea. Seems like poor planning to me." His laugh was warm and she found herself smiling. "What if I never get good at this? What if I'm always slow?" Quinton set down the chalk and turned to face her fully. "Then you'll be slow, but you're already better than you were 2 months ago. You can write your full name and mine. You can read about 20 words. That's 20 more than when you arrived. 20 words is not very many. It's 20 more than never, and tomorrow it might be 21. He reached out and tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, a gesture that had become familiar. "I'm not going anywhere, and neither is the alphabet." The physical side of their marriage had developed slowly, naturally, without pressure or expectation. It started with held hands and progressed to goodnight kisses, then to Quinton's arm around her waist as they slept. The first time they truly came together as husband and wife, it was on a cool October evening after a day spent repairing fence line together. It felt like a natural extension of everything else they had been building: partnership, friendship, something deeper that Willa was not quite ready to name. Afterward, lying in the darkness with her head on Quinton's chest, listening to his heartbeat, she felt something unlock inside her that had been closed her whole life. "I love you," she said, surprising herself with the words. His arms tightened around her. "I love you too. Have for a while now, if I'm being honest." "Since when?" "Since that first night you told me you could not read, the courage that must have taken, the trust. That's when I knew you were someone special." Willa tilted her head up to kiss him. "You're the first person who ever made me feel like I wasn't broken." "You're not broken, you never were," he kissed her forehead. "You're just Willa, and that's exactly who you're supposed to be." By their first Christmas together, Willa could read simple sentences. Quinton had purchased a primer from town, the kind used to teach children, and though part of her chafed at learning from a child's book, mostly she was just grateful to have something at her level. They worked through it page by page, sounding out words together by the fireplace. "The cat sat on the mat," Willa read slowly, finger following each word. "That is a boring cat," Quinton laughed. "Most primer cats are pretty boring, but you read the whole sentence without help. It only took me 5 minutes. Last month it would have taken you 10. You're getting faster." For Christmas, Quinton gave her a slate of her own and a set of chalk in different colors. Willa gave him a new shirt she had sewn, carefully embroidered with his initials, copied painstakingly from his signature. "This is beautiful work," he said, running his fingers over the embroidery. "You did this freehand." "I practiced on scraps first. A lot of scraps." She smiled at the memory of her failures, which no longer felt like failures but like steps toward success. They hosted Quinton's neighbors for Christmas dinner, 3 other ranching families who had become friends over the months. Willa had worried about being judged for her slow reading, but Quinton's friends seemed to take their cues from him, treating her learning as unremarkable. "My oldest boy is struggling with his letters too," one of the wives, Martha, confided while they washed dishes. "Maybe you could tell me how Quinton's been teaching you. Might help us figure out a better way for Johnny." The idea that she might be able to help someone else, that her struggle could have value, was startling and wonderful. "I would be happy to," Willa said. Winter in New Mexico territory was cold but not brutal, nothing like Missouri winters. Snow dusted the mountains but rarely stuck in the valley where the ranch sat. Quinton taught Willa to ride properly, not just perched on a wagon seat but actually handling a horse on her own. She proved to be a natural, with a gentle touch that the horses responded to. "You're better at this than I was when I started," Quinton admitted one afternoon, watching her guide her mare through a series of turns. "Took me a year before I could sit a horse that smoothly. Maybe I'm just a better student than you were." She grinned at him, feeling bold and happy and more herself than she had ever been. They rode out to check on the cattle together, and Quinton showed her the boundaries of his land, explaining his plans for expansion, his dreams for the ranch. Willa listened and offered suggestions, feeling like a true partner in this enterprise. "What if we built a better barn?" she suggested. "One with a proper hay loft and more stalls. We could hire help during calving season, have space for them to bunk." "That's a good idea. It would take most of our savings, but it would be worth it in the long run." He looked at her with unmistakable pride. "You've got a head for this. I like thinking about the future, our future, our future." He repeated the words like a promise. By spring, Willa could read most of the Bible, though she still stumbled over longer words. They had taken to reading verses aloud to each other in the evenings, trading off when Willa got tired. It had become her favorite time of day, this quiet communion by firelight with her husband. She was reading from Psalms one evening in late April when a wave of nausea suddenly overtook her. She barely made it to the basin before losing her supper. Quinton was beside her immediately, holding back her hair, rubbing her back. "What's wrong? Are you ill?" Willa straightened slowly, wiping her mouth, realization dawning. "I don't think I'm ill, I think I'm pregnant." His face went through several expressions in rapid succession: shock, concern, then blooming joy. "Are you sure? My monthly time is late, and I've been queasy in the mornings. My mother had 7 children. I remember the signs." Quinton swept her into his arms, laughing, spinning her once before setting her down carefully as though she might break. "A baby. We're having a baby. Are you happy?" She searched his face, needing to see the truth there. "Happy." "Willa, I'm beyond happy. I'm thrilled. I'm terrified. I'm everything." He cupped her face in his hands. "Are you happy?" Yes, and she was. The future that had seemed so uncertain a year ago now stretched before her, full of possibility and purpose. "I'm very happy." The pregnancy progressed smoothly through the spring and into summer. Willa continued working, though Quinton hovered and fretted and tried to keep her from doing anything strenuous. She ignored him mostly, knowing that keeping active was better than sitting idle. Her reading continued to improve, and she found herself drawn to a new challenge, cooking from written recipes. Martha had lent her a cookbook, and Willa worked through it slowly, sounding out ingredients and measurements, sometimes needing Quinton's help, but increasingly able to manage on her own. "This is delicious," Quinton said one evening, digging into an apple pie that Willa had made following the recipe exactly. "Best pie you've made yet." "That's because I finally understood the recipe properly. Before, I was just guessing at amounts." She felt absurdly proud of the pie, this tangible proof of her progress. The baby came in December, during a cold snap that frosted the windows and made Quinton pace anxiously while Martha and another neighbor woman, Sarah, attended to Willa. The labor was long and hard, but Willa focused on breathing, on the encouragement of the women with her, on the knowledge that Quinton waited just outside the door. When the baby finally arrived, a healthy boy with a full head of dark hair and lungs that announced his displeasure at being born, Willa felt love crash over her like a wave. "A son," Martha said, placing the baby in Willa's arms. "A fine, strong son." Quinton was allowed in shortly after, and the look on his face when he saw his son made Willa's heart ache with fullness. He sat carefully on the edge of the bed, staring at the tiny person they had created. "He's perfect," Quinton whispered. "You're amazing. I can't believe you did this." "We did this." Willa adjusted the blanket around their son. "What should we name him?" They had discussed names during the pregnancy, going back and forth without settling on anything definite. Now, looking at the baby's face, Quinton said, "Thomas, after your father." Willa's eyes filled with tears. Her father had died thinking his daughter was a disappointment, unable to see what she had become. But maybe this would honor his memory anyway. "Thomas Keller, I like that." "Thomas Andrew Keller," Quinton amended. "If that's all right with you, it's perfect." The first months with a newborn were exhausting and wonderful. Thomas was a good baby, sleeping in reasonable stretches and eating well. Willa found herself torn between wanting to stare at him constantly and desperately needing sleep. Quinton helped as much as he could, walking Thomas during fussy evenings, changing diapers, bringing the baby to Willa for nighttime feedings. "You're a good father," she told him one night, watching him rock Thomas back to sleep. "I'm trying. I never thought I'd get this. Wife, child, real family." He looked up at her with such raw emotion that she nearly cried. "You gave me everything, Willa. You gave me just as much." The reading lessons took a back seat during those early months, both of them too tired for much beyond the necessities of daily life. But as Thomas grew and became more independent, able to entertain himself for short stretches, they resumed their evening routine. "Listen to this," Willa said one night when Thomas was about 6 months old. She picked up a letter that had arrived from one of Quinton's distant cousins and read it aloud, slowly but steadily, only stumbling over a few words. Quinton's face split into a huge grin. "You just read an entire letter. A real letter, not a primer." "I did." Willa felt pride surge through her. "It took me a while, but I did it. I'm so proud of you. I'm proud of me too." She set the letter down. "Sometimes I still can't believe this is my life, that I found you, that we have Thomas, that I can actually read. Believe it. You earned every bit of it." He leaned over and kissed her soundly. "You're remarkable, Willa Keller." Thomas grew into a curious, energetic toddler who loved the animals and followed his father around whenever possible. Willa taught him his letters young, using the same patient methods Quinton had used with her. She found that teaching helped reinforce her own learning, cementing knowledge that had once seemed so slippery. "Mama, what this word?" Thomas asked one afternoon, not yet 3 years old, pointing at a picture book. "Horse," Willa said. "Can you say horse?" "Horse." He grinned at her, pleased with himself. "That's right. Very good." She hugged him close, marveling that she could give her son what had been denied to her: early, patient teaching that made reading seem natural and achievable. By the time Thomas was 4, Willa could read almost anything, though she was still slower than people who had learned young. She devoured books borrowed from neighbors and occasionally purchased in town, thrilling to discover the worlds contained in pages she had once seen as mysterious and forbidden. She read novels and newspapers, recipes and ranch records. She wrote letters to Martha's son Johnny, who had indeed struggled with reading and who had benefited from the techniques Quinton had used with Willa. She kept a journal, documenting daily life on the ranch in her careful, slightly uneven handwriting. "I never thought I'd see you writing for pleasure," Quinton said one evening, watching her bent over her journal by lamplight. "I never thought I'd have anything worth writing about. Now I have so much I want to remember." She smiled at him. "Including how patient you were, teaching me by firelight evening after evening. It was never a chore. It was a privilege." He came to stand behind her, hands on her shoulders. "Getting to watch you discover something that gave you so much joy, that's a gift not many people get." Willa stood and turned to embrace him. "I love you more than I can say. I love you too." He kissed her deeply, and she felt the same spark that had been there from the beginning, strengthened now by years of partnership and shared experience. Their family grew. A daughter, Caroline, arrived when Thomas was 5, followed 3 years later by another son, James. The ranch prospered as Quinton expanded his herd and built the new barn Willa had suggested years earlier. They hired help during busy seasons, and Willa found herself managing more of the business side of things, keeping books and writing correspondence to buyers. Martha's son Johnny grew up and became a teacher himself, specializing in helping children who struggled as he had. He credited Willa with inspiring his career path, telling anyone who would listen about how Mrs. Keller had learned to read as an adult and proved it was never too late. "You're famous," Quinton teased her after Johnny's visit one afternoon. "I'm not famous. I just lived through something that might help other people. That's what makes you special." He pulled her close. "You never gave up, not when everyone told you that you couldn't learn, and then when you did learn, you turned around and helped others." Willa thought about the girl she had been, arriving at the Tucumcari train station with a secret that weighed her down like stones. That girl had been brave but broken, convinced she was fundamentally flawed. She bore little resemblance to the woman Willa had become, confident, capable, literate, loved. "I could not have done any of it without you," she said. "We did it together. That's how marriage works." Quinton smiled. "Though I'll admit you did the hard part. I just held up letters and tried to be encouraging. You made me believe I could learn. That's everything." The years passed in the rhythm of ranch life, calving seasons and roundups, harsh summers and cold winters, children growing and changing. Thomas showed an aptitude for working cattle and talked about expanding the ranch someday. Caroline loved the horses and spent hours in the barn, caring for them with single-minded dedication. James was still young but showed signs of having his father's quiet thoughtfulness. Willa taught all of them to read, using the same patient methods that had worked for her. She made sure they understood that learning came at different speeds for different people, that struggling did not mean failing, that persistence was its own reward. On their 15th wedding anniversary, Quinton gave Willa a gift wrapped in brown paper. She opened it to find a leather-bound journal, far nicer than the simple one she currently used, with her name embossed on the cover in gold letters. Willa Keller. "It's beautiful," she breathed, running her fingers over her name. "I thought you should have something nice to write in. You filled 3 journals already. This one is for the next chapter." "What chapter is that?" "Whatever we want it to be. That's the beauty of writing your own story." He kissed her softly. I'm grateful every day that our stories intersected. Me too. She hugged the journal to her chest. I never imagined life could be this good. That evening, after the children were asleep, Willa and Quinton sat by the fireplace as they had done countless times before. No lessons needed now, just companionship and the comfortable silence of two people who knew each other completely. You ever think about that first night? Willa asked. When I told you I could not raid? Sometimes. I think about how scared you looked, how brave you were to tell me the truth. I thought you would send me away. I thought about what my mother would have done. She always believed everyone deserved a chance. I'm glad I listened to that instinct. He reached for her hand. You've made me happier than I ever dreamed possible. The feeling is entirely mutual. She squeezed his hand. Thank you for taking a chance on a mail-order bride who couldn't raid. Thank you for taking a chance on a lonesome rancher in the middle of nowhere. They sat together until the fire burned low, holding hands, remembering and dreaming, grateful for all they had built from a simple advertisement and a desperate hope. Outside, the New Mexico night stretched vast and starry, full of the same possibility that had brought Willa to Tucumcari all those years ago. The town had grown over the years, gaining new businesses and families, becoming more established. Willa and Quinton were respected members of the community, known for their kindness and their willingness to help neighbors. Their children attended the small school that had been built 5 years earlier, where they excelled and made friends. Sometimes, on market days when the whole family went to town, Willa would see the train station where she had first arrived. She would remember standing on that platform, frightened and uncertain, hiding a secret that felt like a defect. And she would marvel at how much had changed, how much she had changed. What are you thinking about? Quinton asked one such day, noticing her gazing at the station, just remembering, feeling grateful. For what, for you? For this life. For evening lessons by firelight that became something beautiful. He smiled and kissed her forehead, heedless of the people around them. I'm the grateful one. You took a risk on an uncertain future and made it into something better than I imagined. As they loaded their supplies into the wagon, children chattering excitedly about penny candy and new books, Willa felt a profound sense of contentment. She had learned to read, yes, but more importantly, she had learned that love could be patient, that kindness could transform, that it was never too late to become who you were meant to be. That evening, back at the ranch with chores done and children tucked into bed, Willa opened her new journal. She sat by the fireplace, Quinton reading his mother's Bible beside her, and began to write. Her handwriting was neat now, practiced through thousands of hours of effort, and the words flowed onto the page with increasing ease. She wrote about arriving in Tucumcari, about the kind rancher who had offered to teach her rather than judge her. She wrote about evening lessons by firelight, about slowly discovering that the written word was not her enemy but her friend. She wrote about falling in love, about building a life and a family, about learning that the most important lessons often came wrapped in unexpected packages. Quinton looked over at her, watching her write with a small smile. What are you working on? Our story. I want the children to have it someday, to understand where we came from. That's a good idea. He set down his Bible. What's it called? Willa thought for a moment, then smiled. Lessons by Firelight. Perfect. He moved closer, reading over her shoulder. You know, your handwriting has gotten beautiful. I can barely remember when you couldn't write your own name. I remember. I remember every single step, and I'm grateful for all of it, even the hard parts. She set down her pen and turned to face him fully. The struggling made the success sweeter, and having you beside me made everything possible. Quinton kissed her, long and deep and full of 15 years of love. Here's to many more years of success and struggling and everything in between. Many more years, Willa agreed. As summer deepened into fall and fall gave way to winter, life on the ranch continued its steady rhythm. The children grew and learned, the cattle thrived, and Willa's journals filled with the stories of their days. She had become something of a local celebrity, the woman who learned to read as an adult, and she used that platform to advocate for patience in teaching, for understanding that different minds worked in different ways. She corresponded regularly with Johnny, now a successful teacher in Santa Fe, discussing methods and approaches for helping struggling students. Some of her letters were published in educational journals, her insights valued by people who had spent their whole lives in academia. It amazed her that the girl who couldn't read had become someone whose words about reading were considered important. "Listen to this," she told Quinton one evening, reading from a letter she had received. "It's from a woman in Colorado whose daughter struggles like I did. She says my story gave her hope that her daughter could still learn. She's asking for advice. What will you tell her? The truth. That it takes patience and the right approach. That love makes the difference. That some of the best teachers are the ones who come to it without formal training but with genuine care." She looked at him meaningfully. "Like a certain rancher I know. I just did what made sense, same as you're doing now. Maybe that's what teaching should be. Not following rigid rules, but meeting people where they are and helping them grow from there." Quinton nodded. "Sounds right to me." Years continued to pass, each one building on the foundation of what had come before. Thomas grew into a fine young man who worked the ranch alongside his father, talking about the future when he would inherit the land and continue expanding it. Caroline, strong-willed and horse-crazy, surprised everyone by declaring she wanted to be a veterinarian, one of the few careers opening to women who were bold enough to claim it. James, quieter but equally determined, showed an interest in teaching, inspired by the stories of his mother's journey and Johnny's success. "We raised good children," Willa said one evening when all three were grown or nearly so. "We did. And we gave them something valuable." Quinton's hair was graying now, lines creasing his face, but his eyes still held the same warmth they had shown that first day at the train station. "We showed them that love is patient, that learning is possible, that family means supporting each other through struggles." Did we show them that, or did we just live it? Maybe there's no difference. On their 25th anniversary, the children surprised them with a party. Neighbors and friends filled the ranch house, spilling out onto the porch and yard. There was food and music, laughter and stories. Johnny came from Santa Fe, bringing his wife and children. Martha and her family were there, along with dozens of other people whose lives had intersected with Quinton and Willa's over the years. "Speech?" Someone called out and others took up the chant. Quinton looked at Willa, who nodded. They stood together, his arm around her waist. "We just want to thank you all for being here," Quinton said, "for being part of our lives and our community. 25 years ago, I placed an advertisement for a wife, not really expecting much. And a brave woman answered it, and she gave me everything I could have hoped for and more." Willa took over, her voice steady. "I came to New Mexico territory looking for a fresh start, carrying a secret I thought made me less than whole. Instead, I found a man who saw past that secret to the person I could become. And every evening by firelight, he taught me not just to read but to believe in myself. That's the real gift he gave me." There were tears in many eyes, nods of understanding from people who knew parts of the story if not all of it. "Here's to 25 more years," Thomas called out, raising his glass. 25 more years," the crowd echoed. Later, after everyone had gone home and the house was quiet again, Willa and Quinton sat by the fireplace, tired but happy. 25 years, Willa mused. It went so fast, and so slow. I can remember that first evening I taught you the letter W like it was yesterday. But it also feels like a lifetime ago. It was a lifetime ago. We were different people then. Better now, though, definitely better. She leaned against him, comfortable and content. Do you ever regret answering my letter, taking on someone with so many challenges? Never, not once. He kissed the top of her head. You were never a challenge, Willa. You were an opportunity, a gift, the best thing that ever happened to me. I love you, Quinton Keller. I love you, Willa Keller. They sat in comfortable silence, watching the fire burn down to embers. Two people who had found each other against the odds and built something lasting. The leather-bound journal sat on the side table, its pages now filled with stories and memories, a testimony to a life well lived. Outside, the New Mexico night was clear and cold, stars scattered across the sky like diamonds on velvet. Somewhere a coyote called, and the wind whispered through the grass. The ranch slept peacefully, secure in the knowledge that it was loved and tended by people who understood the value of patience, persistence, and taking chances on uncertain futures. In the morning, there would be chores and breakfast, the daily rhythm of ranch life continuing as it always had. But for now, there was just the firelight and the quiet, and two people who had learned that the best love stories are the ones built slowly, carefully, one lesson at a time. The years rolled on, bringing changes and constants in equal measure. The new century arrived, 1900 marking not just a change in calendar but a shift in how the West saw itself. Tucumcari continued to grow, the railroad bringing more people and commerce. The ranch prospered under the combined management of Quinton, Willa, and increasingly, Thomas, who had inherited his father's steady competence and his mother's innovative thinking. Caroline left for veterinary school in the East, one of only a handful of women in her class. She wrote home regularly, and Willa cherished every letter, reading them aloud to Quinton by the fireplace that had witnessed so many important moments in their lives. She says she's the best in her anatomy class, Willa reported one evening. I'm not surprised. That girl always had a gift for understanding how living things worked. She gets that from you, Quinton said. You always could make anything grow, remember things when they were struggling. Maybe, but she gets her determination from you. James did indeed become a teacher, taking a position at the Tucumcari school, where he specialized in helping students who struggled with reading. He used his mother's story as inspiration, letting his students know that difficulty with letters did not mean difficulty with intelligence. You created a whole movement, Quinton observed one day, watching James work patiently with a frustrated student. I did not create anything. I just survived and learned. If that helps other people, I'm grateful. You did more than survive. You thrived, and you showed people it was possible. As they moved into their 30s and 40s of marriage, Willa and Quinton settled into the comfortable companionship of people who had weathered life's storms together and come through stronger. They were grandparents now, Thomas having married a capable young woman named Helen who fit seamlessly into the ranch family. Their first grandchild, a boy named Quinton Thomas, but called Quinn to avoid confusion, delighted them both. Willa taught him his letters just as she had taught his father, using patience and creativity to make learning feel like play rather than work. Grandma, look, I can write my name. Quinn, 5 years old and proud, showed her his slate. That's wonderful, sweetheart. You're such a good student. Not as good as you, Grandma. Daddy says you learned when you were all grown up. That's harder. Willa smiled at her grandson. It was harder, but I had an excellent teacher, just like you do. Quinton, now in his 70s but still active on the ranch, watched these teaching sessions with quiet pleasure. History repeating itself, he commented one evening after Quinn had gone home with his parents. In the best way, Willa agreed. She was in her 60s now, her hair more silver than brown, her face lined with years of sun and smiles. Do you remember teaching me, all those years ago? Every lesson, every breakthrough, every moment you realized you could do something you thought was impossible. Those evenings by the firelight shaped everything that came after. She reached for his hand, their fingers interlacing automatically after decades of practice. You shaped everything that came after. We shaped it together. More grandchildren arrived, Caroline returning from the East with a veterinary degree and a husband, setting up practice in Tucumcari. James married a fellow teacher, and they had a daughter they named Willa, which made the original Willa cry happy tears. The family gatherings grew larger, noisier, filled with multiple generations all connected by the love of two people who had taken a chance on each other. On their 40th anniversary, the family organized another celebration, even larger than the one 15 years earlier. This time there were grandchildren running around, friends from across the territory, former students of James and Johnny who wanted to pay their respects. 40 years, Willa said wonderingly. 4 decades since I stepped off that train, scared and hiding a secret. 4 decades since I met the bravest woman I've ever known. Quinton's health was not what it had been, but his mind remained sharp, his love undiminished. Best 40 years of my life. Mine too. She kissed him gently. Thank you for every evening by firelight, for every lesson, for every moment of patience and kindness. Thank you for trusting me with your truth, for working so hard, for building this beautiful life with me. They stood before their assembled family and friends, weathered but standing, and told the story again. How they met, how Willa confessed her inability to read, how Quinton offered to teach her, how those evening lessons became the foundation of a marriage, a family, a legacy. The most important thing we learned, Willa said, addressing the crowd, is that it's never too late to grow. Never too late to learn. Never too late to become who you're meant to be. All you need is willingness and someone who believes in you. And love, Quinton added. Always love. The celebration continued into the evening, but eventually Quinton tired and they retreated to their bedroom. Willa helped him settle in, noting with concern how frail he had become. The years were catching up with them both, but especially with him. Are you all right? She asked. I'm perfect. Surrounded by family, married to the woman I love, having just celebrated 40 years together. How could I be anything but perfect? She lay down beside him, as she had done thousands of times before. I don't want to think about a time when we can't do this anymore. Then don't think about it. Just be here now with me. They lay together in the darkness, holding hands, listening to the sounds of their family cleaning up from the party outside. The fireplace in the main room glowed with embers, casting faint light under the door. By firelight, Quinton murmured, almost asleep. We built our whole life by firelight. We did, Willa agreed. And what a beautiful life it's been. Quinton's health declined over the following year. He no longer had the strength to work the ranch, though he supervised from the porch, offering advice to Thomas and the hired hands. Willa stayed close, reading to him when he wanted, sitting in comfortable silence when he did not. On a cool evening in late autumn, with the family gathered and the fire burning in the fireplace, Quinton slipped away peacefully. Willa held his hand, tears streaming down her face, grateful that he went surrounded by love and warmth. The funeral drew people from across the territory, all wanting to pay their respects to a man who had been kind, fair, and generous. They told stories of Quinton's integrity, his work ethic, his quiet wisdom, but the story that meant the most to Willa was the one Johnny told. Quinton Keller taught me something important, Johnny said. He taught me that teaching is about more than imparting information. It's about seeing potential in people that they don't see in themselves. He did that for his wife, and in doing so, he changed countless lives. Because Willa, inspired by Quinton's patience, inspired me. And I've gone on to teach hundreds of students who might otherwise have been written off as hopeless. That's Quinton's legacy. Willa cried through the service, but found comfort in knowing that Quinton's impact would ripple forward through generations. He had taught her to read, yes, but more importantly, he had taught her to believe in herself. And that lesson, passed on to children and grandchildren and students and strangers, would never die. The months after Quinton's death were difficult. Willa had been married for more than 40 years, and the adjustment to widowhood was painful. But she had her family around her, her children and grandchildren offering support and love. And she had her writing, which became a source of solace. She finished the journal she had been keeping, a comprehensive account of her life with Quinton, from that first meeting at the train station through their final evening together. She had it properly bound and gave copies to each of her children. "This is your inheritance," she told them. "Not the land or the cattle or the house. Those are valuable, but this is more so. This is the story of what love and patience can build. This is proof that it's never too late to learn, to grow, to become more than you thought possible." Thomas, now fully in charge of the ranch, read it through in one sitting. "Mama, this is beautiful, but you're writing like your story is finished. You've got years left." "Maybe, but the heart of the story ended when your father died. Everything now is epilogue." "Then make it a good epilogue," Caroline urged. "Keep teaching. Keep inspiring. Keep being you." So Willa did. She spent her remaining years teaching reading to anyone who wanted to learn, working particularly with adults who had never mastered it. She became a sought-after speaker, traveling occasionally to share her story at teacher conferences and community gatherings. She taught her great-grandchildren their letters, marveling at how the family had grown. She maintained the ranch house, though Thomas and Helen had built their own place nearby. And every evening she sat by the fireplace, sometimes reading, sometimes writing, always remembering. The journal she had given her children was eventually published, first locally and then more widely. Lessons by Firelight. One woman's journey to literacy became an unexpected success, particularly among educators and literacy advocates. Willa found herself corresponding with people across the country, offering encouragement to adult learners and advice to teachers. "I never imagined I'd be famous for not knowing how to read," she told James one day, shaking her head over yet another speaking invitation. "You're not famous for not knowing how to read. You're famous for learning anyway. There's a difference." On her 75th birthday, the family threw her a party at the ranch. Children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren filled the house and yard. Friends from 6 decades in Tucumcari came to celebrate. Even some people who had read her book and wanted to meet her in person made the journey. Speech. Someone called, as they had at so many celebrations before. Willa stood, steadier than one might expect of a woman her age, and looked around at the gathering. So many faces, so much love, all stemming from a simple decision to answer an advertisement 48 years earlier. "I'm not one for long speeches," she began, "but I want to say that my life has been blessed beyond measure. I came to Tucumcari as a frightened young woman with a secret I thought would define me forever. Instead, I found a man who saw past that secret to the person I could become. Quinton taught me to read, yes, but more importantly, he taught me that love is patient, that growth takes time, that it's never too late to become who you're meant to be." She paused, her eyes finding the fireplace where she had spent so many evenings learning and growing. Every one of you here represents a part of the life Quinton and I built together. You're the real legacy, not the book or the speaking or any of that. You're the proof that love and patience and firelight lessons can change the world, one person at a time. There was not a dry eye in the house when she finished. The celebration continued, but Willa found herself drawn to the fireplace, standing before it, remembering. Quinn, her oldest grandchild, now a young man, came to stand beside her. "What are you thinking about, Grandma?" "The first time your grandfather taught me the letter W, how impossible it seemed that I would ever really learn, how patient he was when I got frustrated. I'm glad he taught you. Otherwise, we wouldn't have your book, your story. Oh, I think the story would have existed regardless. But maybe nobody else would have known about it." She smiled at her grandson. "The important thing wasn't the reading itself, though that opened many doors. The important thing was learning that I was capable of more than I believed. That's the lesson worth passing on." "You've definitely passed it on. James says half his teaching philosophy comes from your methods. And half comes from your grandfather's. We made a good team." Quinn hugged her, and Willa felt the continuity of love flowing through generations. This was what mattered. Not fame or recognition, but family and connection, and the slow building of something that would outlast any individual life. As the sun set on her 75th birthday, Willa sat by the fireplace one more time, a small fire burning despite the summer warmth. She opened a fresh journal, the last of many she had filled over the years, and began to write. "My name is Willa Keller," she wrote in her careful, practiced hand. "And this is the end of my story, which is really just the beginning of many others." She wrote about Quinton, about their children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren. She wrote about lessons learned and wisdom gained. She wrote about the transformative power of patient love and the importance of believing in people, especially when they struggle to believe in themselves. When she finished, hours later, the fire had burned down to embers. Willa closed the journal and sat quietly, feeling at peace. She had lived a full life, far beyond what that frightened mail-order bride could have imagined. She had learned to read, to write, to teach. She had loved and been loved. She had built a family and a legacy, and it all started with a rancher willing to teach her by firelight. Willa lived several more years, remaining active and engaged with her family and community. She saw Quinn graduate from university and return to help run the ranch. She attended Caroline's daughter's veterinary school graduation. She celebrated James's promotion to principal of the Tucumcari school. When she finally passed away peacefully in her sleep at the age of 81, the funeral was standing room only. People came from across the country, lives she had touched directly or indirectly through her story and her advocacy for literacy. Her children buried her next to Quinton in the small cemetery outside Tucumcari under a stone that read, "Willa Keller, 1865–1946. Teacher, mother, wife." She learned by firelight and taught by example. The ranch stayed in the family, passed down through generations, each one adding their own chapter to the story. Willa's journals were preserved and eventually donated to the New Mexico Historical Society, where they provided insight into frontier life, adult literacy, and the power of patient education. The little house where Quinton had taught Willa to read was eventually turned into a museum, the fireplace carefully maintained, with displays showing the primers and slates they had used. School children toured it on field trips, learning about the woman who proved it was never too late to learn. And every year on the anniversary of Willa and Quinton's wedding, the family gathered at the ranch for a reunion. They shared stories, introduced new babies, celebrated achievements. And in the evening, when the sun set and the stars came out, Someone would build a fire in the old fireplace, and they would take turns reading aloud from Willa's journals, keeping the tradition alive. The lessons by Firelight had become a family legacy, a reminder that love and patience could transform lives, that it was never too late to become who you were meant to be. That sometimes the greatest gifts came wrapped in the humblest packages. A mail-order bride with a secret, a lonely rancher with time to teach, and evening after evening of Firelight lessons that changed everything. Quinn's daughter, named Willa after her great-great-grandmother, stood before the fireplace one such anniversary evening, reading from the original journal. She was 15, the same age Willa had been when her teachers had given up trying to teach her to read. "The most important thing Quinton taught me," she read in her clear young voice, "was not how to read. It was that I was worth teaching, that I mattered, that my struggle did not define my value. Every person who has trouble learning needs someone to believe in them the way he believed in me." That's the real lesson by Firelight. The family sat in silence when she finished, the fire crackling, the weight of history and love pressing down gently on all of them. They thought about Willa and Quinton, about the brave choice she made to confess her secret, about his patient response, about all the evenings they sat together while he taught her and they fell in love. And they understood that this was the truest legacy, not land or money or even fame, but the ripple effect of love expressed through patience, of teaching offered with kindness, of two people who chose each other and built something that would last far beyond their own lifetimes. The fire burned bright in the old fireplace, casting dancing shadows on the walls, illuminating faces young and old, all connected by the story of a mail-order bride who could not read and the rancher who spent every evening teaching her by firelight. Their love story had become legend, but more importantly, it had become lesson and legacy, proof that the smallest acts of kindness could echo through generations. Outside, the New Mexico night spread vast and starry, the same sky that had watched over Willa and Quinton's first meeting, their wedding, their years together, their endings and their enduring impact. The land remembered them. The family honored them. And somewhere in the flickering firelight, if you believed in such things, you could almost see them sitting together again, his patient voice teaching, her determined focus learning, both of them building a love that would outlast time itself. The story of Willa and Quinton Keller was complete, a life fully lived and a love fully realized, all beginning with a confession and a kindness and evenings by firelight that changed not just two lives, but countless others across time. It was a reminder that it is never too late to learn, never too late to grow, never too late to become who you were always meant to be. All you need is willingness, patience, and someone who believes in you enough to teach you by firelight, evening after evening, until the impossible becomes possible, and the life you never dared dream of becomes the life you actually live.